you're doing is going to be just fine for your shots. And if it's not hurting anything, it looks better on than off, then you're in a good spot. Okay, let's go back to our hero shot here. And I'm going to switch back over to my clip. Now at this point, our shot's looking better, but we do need a little bit of work. Feels like it's maybe underexposed, feels like it might need a little bit more adjustment here. So let's take this offset and just push this up a little bit. And I'm going to call this node just exposure. And I'm going to make a new node. And this is just so that we can break up what we're doing into little steps, and we can turn each step on and off. Okay. Let's make this node saturation and temperature. This, we're going to play around with the color temperature, see if we want this to be a little bit more cool or a little warmer. I think maybe just a touch more cool is fine. We could also see if it's better saturated a little more. We could have some really bright colors like that, or we could take it down, desaturate it. I'm thinking somewhere in there looks pretty good. So maybe just a touch of saturation. So here's before and here's after. Very, very subtle. We see a little bit here on the curtains. And that might be all this shot really needs. We might decide we like it. We might want to get a little bit more detailed later, maybe pop the yellow on these lamps or something like that, but we can do that after we get things mostly dialed in. It's a really good idea to work in passes. And this is true for just about anything when you're creating a video, but is especially applicable to color grading. We've really done one big pass, which is our color space transform. So, even some of these shots are probably too dark or too bright or whatever, but they all have the color management on it, right? Throughout our whole movie, which happens to be a really short movie, but the idea is that you would go through your whole scene kind of holistically and you make sure it looks pretty good overall. Because like, if I were to show someone this shot, I wouldn't be ashamed of it. It looks pretty good. It's not perfect. It's not exactly how I would want to present it in an ideal world, but it's okay. And what we really want to do is get everything to this point, get everything to okay as fast as possible, and then we can go in and tweak things. And so let's just right click on this and say grab still. And then up here in the upper left, we can click on our gallery, and this is where we can save stills from our shots. And it's interesting that they call this a still because while it is a screenshot of this image, it's also a preset. So it's kind of funny. If you right click and you go to display node graph, it also keeps all of the information for your color grade inside of this still. And so they should really call it like a preset or a template or something. But it also has a still frame of your shot. And so you can go to another shot and then you could right click on this still and say play still. And what it'll do is it'll give you this little wipe. And so you can play your footage and look at this still as a reference, which is really helpful for trying to match different elements, right? So now we have our guy here, and this is about how light he is. Of course, this is the shadow side of his face, but he's kind of warmer. We can see the walls are kind of warm. The couch is kind of this warmish green. And by comparing these, we can see that this shot is definitely a little bit too cool. It's a little bit too blue. Whereas if we were to look at the shot by ourselves, our eyes kind of get used to it. And then we go, yeah, I mean, that looks good. It looks good by itself, but it doesn't really match with this shot. And so what we're doing is we're going to match everything to this shot. So that's why we picked this clip that has, the blanket in there that we can match this blanket to. It has lamps that we can match this lamp to. It has walls and pretty much all of the elements that are in the other shots, we can kind of match to this still. So let's do the easy one first, the one that's just a different take of this one. And if we want to copy our color grade, we can just middle button mouse click, that's click down on our scroll wheel. And if we did it right, we should barely be able to see the difference here. All right, that works pretty good. Obviously people are in different spaces, but the colors are nearly identical. So that's great. And then let's also copy this to this shot. And then let's go to shot 2, which is going to be probably different, but let's try out that same grade. I'll middle button mouse click, and man, that's pretty close. That's pretty close. That just about works, I would say. I would say maybe there's just a little bit more green in this shot. And so we could go to our saturation temperature node. We can maybe push this tint away from green just a little bit and maybe towards blue just a touch and see if that tends to work better. And we're never going to get a absolutely perfect match, but these should both feel like they live in the same world. There shouldn't be some big change because nobody's ever going to see these side by side like this, but we want them to feel like they live in the same world and that these two things were shot at the same time. They're happening in the same moment. Even if they don't look 100% perfect, they should look, 95% perfect, 95% there. I think I might go a little less crazy on the green, maybe like three or four. The exposure is about right. The colors are about right. I'd say maybe we could take the exposure up just a touch. I think that works. One piece of advice is don't spend too long trying to guess this. Usually your very first impression is probably about right because your eyes get used to things and you kind of start to justify things. And so it's a good idea to just keep moving, especially at the matching stage, right? So we have shots 5, 8, and 11 matched. 2 looks pretty good. Let's look at 3. 3 looks maybe a little bit dark and a little bit green. Let's middle button mouse click here, copy that over. Now that just makes it a little bit too bright, I would say. Maybe. Let's take the offset down just a touch. Maybe push up the gamma a little bit just to give it a little bit of midtones. And again, I think it's just maybe a little greenish and maybe not quite cool enough. So we could take the saturation temperature, take the temperature down a little bit. That really helps. Look at that. That's a big, big difference. That really helps. Could maybe just take a tiny bit of green out too. Yes. And if we're matching both of these to the same reference, they should actually match pretty well together too. And that's the idea, right? As if we switch in between these, it shouldn't feel super weird. This one's maybe just a little bit bright still. So I might just even take the gain down a little bit. Take the gamma up a touch. Yeah, that looks pretty good, I would say. Kind of switch in between these. Yeah, looks good. Now there are some problems like this backpack looks really red. Again, we can kind of fix this later. We're looking for the great big obvious problems here. Okay, now let's go to his shot here. Again, this is just way too blue. Let's middle button mouse click this grade, and I don't know. This might be farther off than we really want to be. I'm just going to right click and reset node grade for each of these nodes. And I would say the exposure is maybe just a little bright. So we'll take that down just a touch, just in the offset. And then in saturation temperature, we'll actually bring this a little bit further away from blue. And we're looking at the color of his face. We're also looking at the highlights in this couch, matching him with the highlights in this couch and his face. That's looking a little better, I would say. So maybe push this towards green just a touch too. There we go. That's looking a lot better. I can select these and hit Control D to deselect them. So here's where we were, and here's where we are now. One thing I want to look at is this exposure. I feel like it's a little bit dark right here. So I can take this lift and just push this up a touch. It's going to lighten that just a little bit. I can kind of counteract that with the gamma. I could maybe even mess with the curves a little bit. Push that lift up just a touch. Push the gain down a little bit. Just kind of take some of that contrast out, just so we don't plunge too far into black there. When you decrease the contrast in something, sometimes you have to push a little bit more saturation into it. And we kind of just work this image around until it matches with the other one. And that feels pretty good to me. Okay. Shot 10, going to middle button mouse click on 6, and that's going to be the same thing. And so now we have a lot of these matched. The only thing that's a really big deal is this backpack. The reason this backpack is really different is we had different lighting, we had different exposure. This was shot like 3 weeks later because we didn't get a shot of the backpack here when we were in this house. And we don't have any reference to the backpack in our reference image, but we can bring up maybe this image, and I'll right click and say grab still. And then we can go over to our gallery and click on the backpack image and place still like that. And now we have some reference that we can look at with the purple blanket as hands, this kind of thing. So one thing that definitely needs to happen is we need to take this exposure down Probably take the saturation way down. Maybe not so much the exposure, but definitely take down the saturation. Same thing with the lift. Let's push the lift up. This almost seems like this might even be shot with a different color profile or something. I mean, it's just really different. So one thing we could try is just right click. Let's add into a new group. Let's call this Alien CST. This time here in our group post clip, I'll just copy and paste our stuff, but we're going to change our CST. I'm going to make 3 nodes just like this, and I can Control C this CST node, and I'll Control C and Control V the contrast, and Control C and Control V the color cast. That's going to give us the same treatment, but let's take this color space transform and let's see if maybe we shot this with a different thing. Did we shoot with maybe Video Gen 5? Video Gen 4 maybe? See, that's feeling actually a little bit more reasonable. That looks like it's almost matching better. Yeah, I think we might have shot this in the wrong color space. So this is a great reason to use groups, is you can just easily take that out. So let's switch back over here, and now let's work on this. And this is much, much less fighting than we had. So one big thing is maybe I'll take the exposure down just a touch. I feel like it might be just a little magenta here, so we could just push a little bit of green into it. We'll call this exposure. And then in this next node, let's call this sat temp. We'll take this and maybe push a little more green. I'm gonna go way too far, then kind of bring it back just to where that's starting to feel reasonable. Maybe push it a little bit cool. This purple and this red maybe feel just a little bit closer to where they were. And if we want to get really crazy about the purple later, we can do that. We are going to take some of the red down in the other clips, but okay. So this looks pretty good. We can probably copy and paste this to the other shots, but first we're going to take these shots out of our group and put them into the Alien CST group. We're just going to go to groups, pick the group you want, and then say assign to group. That's going to assign those to the new group. And then we'll also middle button mouse click to copy over the clip nodes. Okay, this guy's looking a lot better now. So much better. Yeah, that's reasonable. Look at that. So we have all of this matching together pretty well. And the only thing we're not going to worry about matching so much is going to be this outside shot, which again is a day for night shot. And so let's just do the same kind of work we did on the other ones. Let's do exposure and let's do saturation temp. So exposure, I'm just going to roll down on my offset quite a bit. Just take this way down, something like that. Take the gain down, gamma up a little bit. Saturation and temp, let's take the saturation down a touch. And I'm just going to take the offset towards blue quite a bit, just so we're starting to kind of feel like this is nighttime. We can add some contrast here, push the lift up. It's almost kind of a reminder that this is a nighttime shot. And we'll need a little bit more work on this, but we can get that kind of roughed in. So now we have all of our clips, and it's a good idea at this point to play through it and just make sure that you like what things are looking like. This one I think might just need to be a little warmer and maybe take the gamma down just a touch. It's hard to tell when you're just looking right at an image, but when you cut in between, that can really help. Okay, let's go with that. Just see how that works. And as this plays back, you'll notice problems. And if you don't notice problems, then it's probably close enough and you don't need to worry about it too much. Yeah, that's working well. This one's maybe a little dark, but not too bad. So there we have kind of the first major pass of our scene. We've learned quite a bit about nodes and groups, some tips on matching shots, and we've mostly been using the primary color wheels and the curves. Next, we'll get into some secondary corrections. So now that we have our scene balanced, let's get a little bit more detailed. And this is where Resolve just really does some cool stuff. Let's just go to shot 6 just so we can talk about some of this stuff. Shot 10, because then it's a slightly less awkward kind of face. All right. So far, everything that we've done has applied to the entire image. So for instance, if I make another serial node here, if I push up the offset, everything in the image gets brighter or darker. If I push anything towards pink, pretty much everything goes pink. And none of this is limited to any kind of part of this image. But we have a lot of tools to be able to control not just the image as a whole, but little pieces of the image, both either certain colors or certain brightnesses, certain saturations, or even certain places on screen, like physical spaces. And there are a lot of tools for this. One tool that I really like are the more kind of advanced curves. And so here we have a bunch of different little icons here. And if I click through these, this will give you what a lot of people call the HSL curves. It stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. And instead of remapping the brightnesses of our image, we're selecting colors based on their hue and then adjusting them by clicking little points on this line and moving them up and down. If you've ever used like an equalizer for audio, this is a very similar kind of concept. And so for instance, we have this kind of blue here, which we can see as a spike here on our histogram. And if I make a couple of points here and then take this point and move it up and down, we can see that it changes the hue of that blue in the background. And it pretty much leaves his face and the red shirt and everything unchanged. And so this is a really nice, gentle way to move colors around a little bit. And so you can get pretty detailed. You know, if we don't like that blue, we can make that a different color, or just reset this here. We can switch over to hue versus saturation, which I think a little bit more useful. And we can put our control points here. We could also just select kind of a preset like this sort of light blue. That's going to make 3 control points, and we can move the middle one like that. We could also click here on our image, and that will make control points pretty much where we want to be. So let's just take this and let's say we want to desaturate this blue because we don't want it to be that bright blue. We can take this and just bring it down like that. And look at that. All of a sudden we have what looks like a much more balanced image, and all we're doing is just taking away that blue. So that's a really nice way to adjust a specific color in the color page of Resolve. And there are different versions of this. There's hue versus saturation, luminance, which, you know, you can select a certain hue and then brighten it or darken it. And this can get you in trouble a little bit. It's easier to break and make the image look bad. Then we have luminance versus saturation. So depending on how bright something is, you can make it more saturated or less saturated. Same thing for how saturated something is. So this is great if you have something that's oversaturated. So for instance, shot 4, we could take this, and as things get more saturated, we can push them down and be less saturated. And so this is a nice way to kind of limit the saturation of things just using a curve. So we're not really desaturating most of the rest of the image, but the really saturated stuff we're bringing back down. And of course, you can be a little bit more choosy about how saturated things can go. Kind of depends on what you're looking for. But this can solve a lot of problems. We also have saturation versus luminance. Things that are more saturated, we can kind of darken. So something that's like here, we can just darken that a little bit or brighten it. And that's going to change the way our picture looks. And so you have tons of control here in the curves. We'll go back to shot 10 here. Another tool that's sort of similar to these hue curves would be the color warper. Now, this is, I mean, really kind of a similar concept. It's just built kind of around a circle. And so let's say we want to make his lips really saturated here. I can click on his lips, and that's going to select the nearest control point here. And so I can take this and I can move it farther away from the center to make it more saturated, or closer to this center to make it less saturated. And I can move it around the circle. We'll just make this a little bit bigger so we can see it. I can move this around the circle to change the hue itself. And what's really neat is I can actually click and drag directly on the image like this. And as I click and drag, it's like I'm clicking and dragging in the color warper, but I can stay right on the image. So depending on how many control points I have here, so maybe I want just a lot. This is kind of an easy way to break your image, having all these control points, but you can also get really detailed. So I can take these lips and I can kind of push them out like that to make those a little bit brighter. I could take his skin and move it in to make it a little bit less saturated. I can take this blue and move that in to make that less saturated. And I can do all of this just by kind of clicking and dragging. And I can get a really interesting look here just with one tool. Let's say I want to take these lips and change their color. I can kind of push that around. Now he has pink lipstick. Oh, so many things I could do. But this color warper is a really nice tool. And I think I'll just reset this and turn this back down to 6x6, because this is also a great tool for kind of adjusting your look. And what I like to do is go into a shot like this. And sometimes I'll just use this, sometimes even just on the group post clip as creating a look. So we can just do like a shift spacebar here, and you can take away or shift some of the colors that are in your image. Like for instance, this kind of yellowish green, a lot of the time I don't really want that yellowish green. So I could take this yellowish green and kind of just push it in, and it sort of clarifies the colors that are there. Same thing for this kind of pinkish purple. I could bring that in, and you don't see a lot of difference here, but as we turn this off and on, it just kind of takes away that nasty green blech tone, and it just makes everything feel a little bit more pure. We're just kind of desaturating the colors that aren't as prominent, and it just makes it look clearer. We could take things that are royal blue like this and then push those a little bit more cyan. Same thing for green. We could push that a little bit more cyan. And so we can kind of create this color palette just with the color warper, and it's just a fantastic way to work. So easy. And man, it makes things look good. If you're subtle with it, if you're careful with it, you do it right. Now we can go through, and now we have sort of this kind of teal and orangish look on our image that we didn't really have before, right? And depending on how much you like that, you can keep that or not. It's maybe making his skin a little bit pink. So maybe we can take this more towards orange and see if that helps a little bit. That definitely feels a little better. And we can kind of go through our shots. This is, again, this is something you should probably do before you go through and color correct all of your shots. But the color warper is a great, great tool for this kind of thing. So I don't know, maybe we'll leave that on there. I do like it. So we'll just call this color palette, call palette, call pal. Now we have this much more kind of clarified look. Really like that. That looks nice. So yeah, color warper is great. There's a lot of different things you can do with the color warper. I mean, we could have a whole course on just the color warper, but we got other stuff to get into here. Another tool is the qualifier. Now, the qualifier is sometimes used for similar things that we've kind of been working with. For instance, a lot of people will kind of grab somebody's skin, grab the skin tones on the skin. You can think of this as kind of like a green screen keyer. And what you're really doing is just selecting certain colors in the image, which you can kind of preview with this little button up here. This will just put this on gray. And as I select the different colors, it's going to show me the selection here. And so if I just want his skin color, I can kind of go over that. That's going to pick just his skin color. And then I can take this, and whatever I do is only going to happen inside of that selection. And so, you know, if I make this crazy blue, it's only going to happen to the parts that are selected. And we can adjust the selections here. We can select a smaller range of hue and move that around to adjust our selection, soften it and that kind of thing. And obviously this is a huge correction that we wouldn't make, but you can kind of start to see the problem with this. The big thing is that you don't always get a really clean selection. Sometimes you get noise and stuff that's happening, and it's really hard to make something look natural by selecting colors and adjusting them this way. And so if you can stay away from it, I would probably recommend just staying away from the qualifier unless you have a really specific reason to only use the qualifier. One reason might be if you were going to do something that wasn't just a color shift, something that you could do in the curves, like a hue, saturation, or luminance change. If it's something like you're going to blur something, like if you're going to do something like select his skin and then do that trick where you take the midtone detail down. So what we could do is just select his skin like this. Again, we'll look at the selection. I can switch this to black and white mode too. And we could change our center, change our width. And we're just going to try and select his face mostly. I'll turn off saturation and luminance, soften this a little bit. We're going to try and get the best selection of his face, kind of blur that a little bit. And you can go in here to this matte finesse here and you can change your matte. And basically you're trying to get a good selection, just like you would for something like a green screen something like that. You can clean the white, which stands for the part that you're selecting. You can clean the black, which is the part that you're getting rid of. And you can make this kind of crazy selection. You can push that pre-filter up and that'll help a little bit. And now we have his skin roughly selected here, right? And so if I turn off our highlight, nothing's happened so far because all we've done is just tell this node exactly where to do whatever we're going to have it do. And we haven't really told it to do anything yet. We've just made a selection. And so now if I take this hue, I can move this around and I can give him purple skin if I want to, that kind of thing. But where this is really helpful is if we go to one of these other tabs, so like this blur tab, we can push the radius up on the blur and that can blur his skin a little bit. Or maybe a little bit better idea would be to take this mid-tone detail down. So you take the mid-tone detail down and that kind of softens his face a little bit. And you would have to do some more work to get a really good matte because we don't really want to soften his eyes or anything. You can make somebody look a little bit younger by doing this kind of thing, kind of refining their face like this. And in the paid version of Resolve, there are automated tools and stuff for this. One's called face refinement. But this is really the only case that I would consider using a qualifier for, just because you have to work so hard to get a good selection that, I mean, if you can do it with the curves, I would really recommend you do it with the curves. Okay. Now, another way that we can select different aspects of our image is just with the physical space, like, you know, the left side or the right side of the frame. We can do that with a window. This fourth icon over is window, and you can think of a window as just like a mask, kind of like in Fusion. Whatever we're doing in this node to only happen inside of a circle, we can click this circle thing and it will make a circle. And whatever we do is only going to happen inside of that circle. And we can combine something like the qualifier where we're just selecting his skin, and we can limit that qualifier to just the circle, and we can have a little bit better result for our adjustment. Let's just reset this node. And let's say we want to darken this side of the shot. We could put a window on this node. We could just use a circle window or whatever window we want. And these little handles here is how soft the selection is. So if I just push this really blue just so we can see it, if I take this down and turn off our overlay here, we can see that this edge is a little bit crisper. But if I turn on the power window overlay and kind of push this up, we'll see it kind of fades out. And this right here is probably the most valuable tool for secondary corrections, is a big soft circle window, because there's a lot you can do with it. If I want to darken the side of this shot, I can just put my big soft circle window over here, just make it even bigger, make it even softer. And then I can just bring down the offset, take that down a little bit. And guess what? Nobody's ever going to know that I put a window over there. But look at that difference. Nobody's ever going to know that because it's big and soft, right? If I want to add a little bit more brightness to his face, I could add a big soft circle window here, put it roughly over his face, and then push the offset, right? Push the gain, take down the gamma, whatever we want to do. And I can just add a little bit of brightness to his face that way. So this is a great way you can kind of relight things in Resolve just using a big soft circle window. Now there are other windows. I'll just turn this off for a minute. One of them being like a pen tool. So you could draw your own shape like that. But again, a lot of the time you want these really soft. And so you don't generally need to be this exact with your windows because you're going to want this soft anyway. You can just go down here to the softness controls and push inside and outside up like this. And then we have the same kind of controls. So unless you're going to have a really irregular shape, I probably wouldn't worry about drawing your own shape like this. It's going to look roughly the same as if you were to draw a circle window. And it takes less time to draw a big soft circle window than it does to make your own selection, right? Boom, kind of the same deal. We also have a gradient window. That's my favorite. And it's fully on the flat side of the line. And then it fades out along the arrow. And so again, if I wanted to darken this side, I could kind of just fade it off like that. Reset this and just take the offset down. And we have a similar kind of thing. So it kind of depends on what you want to do, but these windows control where the node does its stuff. And so you could have 10 different things happening in one node. So, you could have something where we desaturate blues completely. We could have something with, that pushes down the offset, makes everything a little bit warmer. We have some color warper stuff. I mean, you could do a bunch of different stuff in this node. That is what makes it different than the Fusion node is you have a bunch of stuff you can do. It's just kind of a group of all of the corrections you're doing down here. But once you add either a qualifier or a window, it changes where the node does its job. And so if we were to switch to this highlight mode, we can see that the node's really only being applied where it's white here. And then as it fades out and gets black, we're not really touching the image at all. And so if I were to turn this off, we see it's only affecting things on the left side of the image. And so you have a lot of control, a lot of creativity over how you want to adjust your images. Now, let me show you something really cool. Let's say we want to make him seem like he has a black eye. We could take a circle window. We can just put it over his eye like this. We'll just kind of rotate it like that. And oftentimes what I'll do when I don't want to see the outline of this window is I'll just switch to the curves palette, and that'll just hide that window. But again, because we have this node selected, anything that we do in the color palettes down here is only going to happen inside of that window. So we could take the offset down a little bit like this, maybe take the gamma down, and we'll push the gamma a little bit warm. Now he has this kind of black eye. But once this starts moving, because remember we're color grading video here, look at what's happening. It's sliding on his face. It's not really staying on his face. And so when it comes to a window, you can always track a window to kind of stick to whatever you have it over. And it's pretty amazing the things you can do in the color page. Like check this out. I'll make this a little bit bigger just so it has a little bit more room to think. And I'll switch over to the tracker page and then check this out. I've done nothing. I've literally just put this over his eye and watch this. It like perfectly tracks to his face and even tracks in 3D space. Like it sticks to his face. This is a really typical result for window tracking in the color page. It's just absolutely so dialed in, so good. And now when we kind of move this back and turn off this overlay, play this back, you absolutely can't even tell that we messed with his eye. It's just perfect. And the softer the window, the easier it is. And the more subtle your correction, the easier it is. But look at this, even this. If I were to take this softness down a lot like this, and I were to take this offset down a lot so we can just really see that difference, check out how good this is anyway. I mean, it's stupid. Like I'm worried about what Blackmagic did to make this happen. Like, is it like actual black magic? Is that what's going on here? I don't know. And also notice this, I've already tracked this, but I can still change this around and I can change its size and its shape and even its position, and it still moves relative to that track, which is pretty cool. And so it's really easy in the color page to just select part of your image and track that color grade onto it. So cool. So now going back to our day for night shot, we know a little bit more about how things work in the color page, and we could do some more fancy stuff. So for instance, I could say Alt S, and I could draw a mask just kind of like we did in the Fusion page here for our sky. And we'll just soften that selection out a little bit. Just soften it out. And then I could take my curves, let's say, and I could bring down the sky and really make a big difference here and have it look pretty natural. Let's say I want to add those lights back in, kind of like we did in Fusion. I can make a new node, but this time I'm going to add a layer node. And what this does is it will take any input, just like in Fusion, and it will lay this entire image over whatever we have here using this little node here. It's kind of backwards because the lower parts are actually the upper layers. And so here's the original footage, and I can just use a window here and just make a little selection with my circle window to add some of that light back in. Again, soft circle does wonders. And if I want to add another window and kind of have multiple windows affecting the same node, I can just either click on a different kind of window here and just add more, or I can go up to here where it says plus circle, can add another circle like this. And again, really soft looking thing like that. Another circle. And so you can really make the argument like, wow, you could do quite a bit of kind of compositing things right here in the color page, even if you don't want to jump into Fusion. Very, very powerful page. So now we have our lights on and it looks pretty good. Maybe we want to put a little more saturation in there. It's looking pretty nice. Really depends on how crazy we want to get. And then of course, if this shot were moving, we could track each of those windows and that kind of thing. But since it's locked down, our life's a little bit easier. That's nice. So you can spend as much time as you want making this look like a night shot. I'm going to open my clips again. Let's just go through and see if there's anything that we want to change just with some secondaries. There's no real rules here. You can hit Alt S and then let's just label this secondary. And you can have lots and lots of secondaries. You don't have to have just one. In fact, it's a good idea to run secondaries in parallel nodes. So like for instance, we might have a node here. Let's just say for whatever reason, we want this side to be really blue. Just for an example, a little bit higher contrast for whatever reason. If we were to make another serial node after this is just a node that runs in series, one after another, and then, make this really yellow and saturated and that kind of thing. These would mix together and make green. And it doesn't look, really natural. But we can make this a parallel node instead. I can right click and say add node, add parallel. And I'm just going to Control C and Control V this right here and then get rid of it. And this can sometimes give us a little bit more natural result, how these parallel nodes mix together. So here this is as parallel. I'll grab a still. Here we are as a serial. And let's play that still. And the difference is really subtle, but there is a difference in running one in parallel and one is not. This one looks a little bit more yellow. This one looks a little bit more green. Again, you could probably color grade like 100 different images and maybe not have any problem with running these in serial like that, but it's generally safer to do these secondaries in parallel. And if you're like, what the heck does parallel even mean? Why would I use that? I don't understand the big deal. It's really not that important. If you don't see the big deal and you want to be safe, do it this way. If you'd rather just keep things simple and put them in series, that's okay too. And again, it's just picking things that we want to change about the image and just getting a little bit more detailed this time, right? So maybe it's something where we want these lamps to be a little bit warmer. Again, big circle window, push the offset a little warmer like that. That help kind of warm up the lamps. So here's before, here's after. And you don't want to go like super crazy like this. That doesn't look realistic, but you can go a little bit, little subtle things. All of those kind of add up to be a big difference. And you can hit up and down on the keyboard, by the way, to go in between clips. You can go up and down on clips like this. So what I like to do is just kind of close my clips and kind of go up and down, make sure that they all look good. So here's definitely a problem for secondaries. This red versus the other red. Let's go ahead and grab a still of this shot and then we can play it here. See if we can kind of match these reds. This red actually looks pretty good at this point, but it's kind of bright on this shot. So maybe we'll take this shot and just select the red of our backpack with a soft window. And then we'll actually change the red with some curves. So we'll probably just use like hue versus saturation. We can kind of just drag over this red. And now I can take the red saturation down a little bit just to kind of calm that down. So it goes from electric to normal. Yes. This looks pretty good too. That works a little better. This shot, I feel like the lamps could be a little bit warmer. So again, we can just do these kind of soft circle windows. Maybe even take the temperature just a little warmer like that. Again, big soft windows let you get away with lots. We'll just add another window here, another circle, nice, big and soft. Like this. Now we're changing our lamps from kind of whitish blue to nice and yellow. Same thing here. Let's say this blue is just a little bit too crazy. We can again just use the hue versus saturation curves and just desaturate that blue a little bit. Do the same thing on shot 10. Shot 8 is the same as shot 5, so I could middle button mouse click here to warm up those lights. Same for shot 11. It's a little better. Maybe we feel like the blue on this curtain is a little much. I can make another node. We'll call this curtain. And I could probably use like a gradient, and I'll just fade that out like this. We could take the saturation down a touch, maybe take the offset down a little bit just to darken that side. We don't want to take it down way too much to where these blacks are just way too dark. We'll just keep it tasteful here. Just something maybe a little closer to that. So here's before and here's after. We're just darkening that down a little bit. I feel like the light coming in here is just way too bright. So again, we could make another serial node. We could take a soft window like this. And again, just maybe take this offset down a little bit. Just darken that a touch. The only thing is it's going to be a problem when she walks in front of it. And so we could do something like animate a window over her that kind of holds this darkness out. So the way to do that would be to add another circle. But here we have these little options. And if we click on these like blinds option like this, that will subtract this circle window from our original selection. So we can kind of minus that. So let's just soften this out and we'll put this over her. So it's just not quite as crazy. And we might just be able to track this. I'll just hit Control T to track. That's the same as just going here and clicking this track forward button. I'll just hit Control T to track forward. And it kind of sticks to the side of her like that, which isn't quite what we want. So it might just be easier to not track it. We could maybe turn off 3D. Let's try that. No, that doesn't quite work either. So this is kind of one of those situations where tracking might actually not work, mostly because she's just turning around 180. So what we could do is animate this. A way to do that would be just to go to where we want this to start. And then over here on the right, we have this keyframes panel. I can click this and I can click on any of these keyframe diamonds for whichever node I want. And so this is node 5. So I can go over to node 5 and just click on automatic keyframing right here. And now I'm just going to touch whatever I want to adjust. So I'm just going to move this to where I want it, and it's going to add a little keyframe there. Now we're going to move over a little bit. Let's just say to like here. I'm just going to move that over to where it's supposed to be. And look, it adds these little arrows. That means that it's animating in between these. And now if we go in between, see it kind of moves this subtly that way. Then we're going to move this towards the end of the shot, rotate it, put it where it's supposed to be. And I'm just going to check this kind of throughout the shot. And this doesn't have to be as crazy as, what we would do if we were compositing, because again, we're using big soft circle windows. Okay. And once I have the basic motion, I'm going to turn off this automatic keyframing thing. And that's going to keep that movement just in the pan and tilt and rotate of my transform for my window here. So now if I turn off my window outlines, we don't see anything crazy, but look at this difference we're making. We're really darkening that side, but because we use soft windows and we're just animating those along, you don't see any difference. You don't see anything weird. So you can kind of go through and do some fancy stuff like that too. There's so much stuff you can do in the color page when it comes to getting detailed like this. So much fun. Let's also take a second and talk about color scopes. Color scopes are a way to measure the actual colors in an image. It's really easy to look at an image and kind of have your eyes start to play tricks on you. Your eyes will kind of get used to an image and it won't look so blue anymore. It won't look so saturated anymore. Even like a log image, after a while you look at this and you go, it looks pretty good because your eyes kind of get used to it. But the scopes will always tell you the real deal. They're down here in the lower right. And I'm going to click this expand button just so that we can talk about scopes a little bit. And in Resolve, there are 4 main scopes: the parade, the waveform, the vector scope, and the histogram. For a minute, I'm just going to focus on one of them. I'm just going to click on this one scope thing, switch this to waveform. And there's some options here. I'm going to switch this just to Y and turn off colorize. This is going to help me just explain scopes a little bit. This waveform scope is just a graph of the brightness of the pixels versus their position horizontally. And so if it's on the left side of the screen, it's on the left side of the graph. If it's bright, it's towards the top of the graph. If it's dark, it's towards the bottom. On the left side of the screen, we have some darker pixels here and some even darker pixels here in the couch. And this wall right here, we can see is right here on the waveform. I know that because it's about this much of the screen. It's on the left, and it's, kind of darker grayish, bluish, a little under middle brightness. And so it's easy to figure out that's where this is. Then we have the stuff in the couch, kind of the darkest parts of the couch are right here. That's going to be this little divot right here. And as we go across the frame, we can see the different brightnesses of things across the frame. And so the waveform tells you how bright things are, 0 being totally black, 1023 being totally white, versus their position horizontally in the frame. Now, I have this on a certain mode, just so that we can explain this a little better. But you can also show the waveform in RGB mode, and you can colorize it. And what this does is it makes 3 different waveforms, one for each channel, red, green, and blue. And so you can kind of see where the color casts are in the frame. So towards the left, we have stuff that's this brightness, but the blue channel and the green channel are higher than the red channel, which means that this is going to look sort of cyan. And of course, it does look cyan there. We have the red channel a little higher here, which means that we have a red shirt, and so on. What I like to do is use the parade, which is basically this same thing. They're just split out side by side. And this makes it easy to tell not only how bright things are, but roughly what color things are. And then if we want to do something like change the white balance, we can use these signals to help balance it out. So I could take this offset and push this around until this little cloud on each of these signals is at the same height, which means that it's going to be the same brightness for each channel, which means that it's going to be neutral. So it doesn't have a color cast. It's going to be white or gray, right? So if I can push this offset around like this and make those equal, now we have a neutral signal on this back wall. And so you can pick something that's white or neutral and kind of use that to inform your color balance. That's where this is really helpful for our scopes. I'll switch from parade to vector scope. A vector scope is a circular scope, and it plots all the pixels of the image at a place within this circle. The farther away you get from the middle of the circle, the more saturated it is, and the direction that those points move determines its color. And so if I were to push this really orangish red, we can see the signal kind of go up towards orangish red. If I were to bring this down to cyan, we see everything looks cyan, and so on. It's pretty much like the color wheel. It's laid out just like the color wheel, but it graphs all of the pixels that are in the image. If you're not familiar with scopes, I definitely recommend the time and pixels training with Daria here on YouTube. You can just Google how to use video scopes, time and pixels. Daria is an excellent teacher. If you don't know who Daria is, she's one of my favorite people. And she has a really good explanation of how to read scopes and how those all work. So if you want to learn more about that, I'm going to let her explain that. But in Resolve, our scopes kind of live down here most of the time, and you can switch to whatever you want. I usually have this on parade just so I can tell how bright things are and what their color cast is. One last thing I want to mention before we get out of the color page are behind these primary color wheels, there are a few different panels. Up here in the upper right, there's these little 3 icons, the color wheels, color bars, and log wheels. If you switch to color bars, this is just a different interface for doing the exact same thing as the color wheels. So this is great if you want to just take away some green or, push a little bit more green into the shot. You can do that by just moving these bars up and down, and it might be a little bit more exact, right? So if you have a little bit of a green tinge, you can just like mouse over this in the gain and kind of roll down on your scroll wheel a little bit and take away some of the green. So if you prefer something like this, that's a great way to do it. But something else is the log wheels. Now, this is something that's really confusing for people. This panel is called the log wheels, but it doesn't really have anything to do with log footage. So you don't need to use it on log footage. It's not for log footage. It has nothing to do with log footage at all. It's called log wheels. All right, just go ahead, just accept it. What this is a similar tool. Let's just go to a different shot. We'll just go to this shot right here. This is a similar tool to our color wheels in that it splits up the image into the darkest parts, the midtones, and the brightest parts, and then kind of the overall. Kind of does the same thing. It just calls it shadow, midtone, and highlights, and offsets the same. And the ways that you adjust things are similar, but instead of adjusting the entire image and just being stronger in the brighter parts, this highlights wheel, if I push this really pink, you'll notice almost nothing happens. Why is that? The reason for that is because these highlights only adjust the image within the highlights range. So if I were to adjust this highlights range right here, and I was to bring this down, we'll see that we can push more and more pink into the image until I get all the way to 0, and then it's just doing everything, right? And so it's kind of a threshold of where I want to adjust this image. I can double click to reset things. And then same thing for shadows, right? If I make really blue shadows, that's going to make the darkest parts of this image really blue, but it's going to kind of cut it off at 33%. And so if I were to take this down, it's going to make less of the image blue. It's only going to make the really dark parts. If I push this way up, it's going to make everything blue. And so it's sort of like it's split up like the color wheels, except for you have a little bit more control over exactly what parts of the image you want to adjust. Now, why would you need that? Most of the time, honestly, you probably won't need it. What I use this for is if I want to tint something like this window, I might be able to push, like, if I want to make that window kind of yellow, I can kind of push this highlights yellow and then take that range down until it starts to adjust the highlights in the window. And then I could do something like limit this with a window. I'm windowing the window. And that's a way that you can kind of make sort of like secondary adjustments
This video
using the color wheels. Something I find myself doing a lot is if I want cooler shadows, I like to kind of build this into my look sometimes, is just push these shadows really cyan like this, but then take this lower range down and just barely start to push that in, just so it's starting to make the really, really dark midtones tinge a little bit cyan. So here's without it and here's with it. It's almost, you almost don't even notice it. It's just pushing that a little bit more cyan, makes the colors look a little bit more richer. And that's just a really quick way to do that. There's a bunch of different ways to do that. You could do this in your curves. A lot of people will do that. You could unlink the different channels and you could push up blue in the darker parts, you know, and take away red from the darker parts like this. And that's going to give you a similar thing. You know, we're kind of pushing that bluish cyan into the darker parts of the image. But I mean, that's a lot of work when you could just grab the shadow and push that cyan and get a really similar result and then just kind of dial it in with the range. So there's all these different kinds of tools and different ways that you can use them. And so if you need to do something like that, that works. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but behind the primaries are the HDR wheels. This is essentially the same thing as the log wheels, except for it's just gone insane. So instead of 3 different ranges, you have 6 different ranges. And you can kind of preview the ranges by holding down your mouse on this little mask button here. And you can see this is where this wheel is going to affect, where this wheel is going to affect, and so on. And so you can get really detailed and adjust things here in the HDR panel. And they call this high dynamic range because you generally only need this if you have an image that's just really, really contrasty. Like, you know, you have a really bright window and you want to just affect the window and nothing else. You can kind of isolate that with this range. It makes it a little bit easier. Honestly, I almost never use the HDR palette. I know some people do. There's a lot of really good controls in here. Especially if you're new to color, I would really recommend just stay with the primary color wheels like here, because you can solve 90% of your problems just with this palette alone. And when you combine the curves, I mean, you can just do anything. So there are so many more things to get into here, but this video is going long enough, man. If you're interested in going a little bit deeper in color grading, make sure to check out our DaVinci Resolve resources PDF. This is a collection of the top things that I would recommend that you check out if you want to learn more color. It's available right now, and it's totally free. It's my gift to you. Let's keep going. Now let's jump into the Fairlight page. The Fairlight page is the 6th page over, and this is where you go to get super detailed with your audio. Much like the Fusion page and the color page, this is kind of like a dedicated app. This is a specialized page that shares the same timeline as your edit page, but is focused on its specialized task, which in the case of Fairlight is audio. Now I have a demo timeline here, and this is If we were to open up our media pool on the left here, it's under bin 6 Fairlight page if you're following along with the downloadable files. Again, there's a link in the description below if you want to follow along, download this for free. And I'm in Fairlight page finished right now, just so that we can see all of our fancy things. So let's take a look at the interface of Fairlight. Of course, we've kind of already jumped into the media pool. In the upper left, we have our media pool here. The only little difference is that we have a source viewer here, but it's just focused on audio. So it's easy for us to scrub through our different audio sources here, see the waveforms and that kind of thing, because this is all audio focused, right? Next to the media pool, we have our effects, and this is just filtered to show you only audio effects and audio transitions. And so this works as expected. You take an effect and you can drag it onto any clip here in the timeline, just like you would in the edit page. This should make a ton of sense. You can also drag this onto a track, which is a little different than the edit page. You can put an effect on any track just by dragging it onto it. So if I wanted to make this orange track all echoey, I can do that. And that's kind of how the effects work. Now, when you drag an effect onto something and you let go, it will bring up the panel for that effect. And this is a little different than the other pages that usually have things to do in the inspector. But if you open up the inspector and go to effects, you'll also have all the adjustments for the effects here in the inspector. But if you click this little button here, that'll bring up the pop-up, and that usually has just a little bit nicer interface, although it's the same controls. You can usually have some visualization and that kind of thing, as well as some presets up here in the left. So I'll close that effects panel, close the inspector just to give us some room. Up above, we have our meters. And as I play this back, we can see our different channels and how loud they are in all of the meters. We have controls for loudness right here, which is great if you're doing broadcast stuff that needs to be a certain loudness, or if you're concerned with hitting a certain loudness for YouTube or online, this is where you would do that. And then over here on the right, we have our viewer. Then down below, we have our playback controls and our tools, and then our timeline. And this is very similar to the other pages. And the timeline acts pretty much like the edit timeline. You can zoom in by holding Alt and rolling in the scroll wheel. If you hold Shift and scroll up and down, you can zoom vertically. If you hold Control and zoom with your scroll wheel, you can scroll horizontally. You can zoom really, really far and navigate your timeline like this. And so you can kind of see the difference already to where you can get really detailed with your audio here in Fairlight. In fact, you can even zoom in, check this out. You can zoom into the sample level here in Fairlight, where you just can't get that detailed in the edit page. There are quite a few similarities, like you can grab these little white handles, which you can also do in the edit page to fade clips. You can grab them and move them around. You can trim them. A lot of that stuff works in a very similar way. Over here towards the right, we have our mixer. I can just grab this and drag it to the left, and we can see all of our track strips here. Now, this is where a lot of magic happens in Fairlight. You can obviously set the levels for each of the tracks like you would expect on a track mixer. You can set your pan like left and right, and you can even do surround sound panning. But this is also where we have a built-in EQ for each track. You can just double click on this and that opens up the equalizer. And we have some dynamics plugins. And what this does is lets you add compressor, limiter, gate, that kind of stuff to your track. We'll get into this in a little bit. You can also add or remove effects to each track here. You can quickly set your inputs for the various tracks here if you want to record into the timeline. Then of course we have our record arm, which you click this if you want to set this track to record when you're in recording mode. You have your solo, which mutes everything except for this track, and then mute, which mutes the track. And so you have a lot of control over your tracks here in the mixer. And also kind of on the right side of the mixer, we have the buses, which is kind of like the different mixes that you can make from your tracks. It's sort of a different way to group your tracks if you're not familiar with a bus. And these panels we can hide and change around using the buttons up top. We can also open the inspector, which is going to be very similar to what you're used to from the edit page. In fact, it has pretty much the same controls. Also in the upper left, we have our sound library, which this is really cool. This is a panel where you can tell Resolve where your sounds live on your system. If you go to these three dots and say add library, you can select a folder on your computer. It's like here's an explosion pack, let's say. And once you pick that folder, you can just say select folder, and it will scan all of the clips in that folder and it will index them. So you can hit OK. And now you can search and they'll really quickly come up in this list, and you can preview these by just double clicking. Really cool. So that's a quick way to be able to pick the exact right sound effect to put into your edit. So that's really some of the lay of the land as far as the interface goes. I'm going to open up the media pool and go to Fairlight page and double click on Fairlight page start. And we'll just make this a little bigger. And here we have a scene that is probably pretty typical of, where you would be if you haven't done any kind of sound editing or sound design, really. We just have our basic dialogue and our video.
Where is he?
I had him and then you pushed me.
And then it's totally silent. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Fairlight to rebuild everything that we should be hearing in this scene. And it's going to be exciting. So the first thing I'll do is go over to my media pool, and here under media, let's find Fairlight media. And we have a whole bunch of sounds and things here that we can use. And you're free to use any of this for anything you want. It's our little gift to you if you get the files here. And so what I like to do is go through and just think about just one by one, what kind of sounds should we be hearing that we're not hearing, just because we only really have their voices. So one big one would be closing the door. And so we have some sounds here. GC, house door open. We have doorknob sound. There we go. House door close. Let's just drag this to its own track. That's going to make a new track right here. And we're just going to line this up. We can just zoom this in a little bit. And let's play this back with spacebar. Look at that. That almost works. That works just as it is. Yeah. That was lucky. That works. Anytime that we drop some audio on a track, it's a good idea to start naming that track. Just call this door sounds. It's okay to be really specific. You can make lots of different tracks if you want to. So we'll call this door sounds, because we'll probably have some other sounds too, like the doorknob. So we have some doorknob sounds. I can double click this and preview it. Yeah, that's nice. Okay, let's try that. We can just trim this a little bit. Let's just drag this to its own track, and we'll call this door sounds 2. It's okay to have multiple tracks on things. Let's just do something like that. Yeah, that works well. And we have her slipping, which we might be able to use this friction. Yeah, that works. Again, I'm just going to drag this to a new track. And you can put things on the same track, and it's totally okay to do that. It's just going to be a little bit easier later when we're mixing things to have stuff kind of on their own tracks. We'll call this one door sounds 2. This one's going to be feet, let's say, for now. So we'll just have this kind of slip. Great. That should work. She falls down and we don't really hear anything fall down, but it does get his attention, right? So right here, we need to have some kind of falling down sound. So we have a few different options here. Destruction glass. Okay. Drops. Small box drop concrete. Yeah, maybe something like that. I can make an in and an out here, just like I would on the edit page. Drag this down here, and so let's just put this in. Okay. And we'll just combine this with a couple other things here. That works. Just kind of stack these for now. Body drops. That's nice. Let's hit I for in, O for out. Drag this down. We can kind of mix these together. Yeah. Let's just have this come in right after she slips. Yeah, very good. And so we'll call this drops 1, drops 2, and drops 3. Let's select all these and we can right click and go to change track color. We'll just make those teal for no reason other than teal's nice. And really you get the idea. You kind of go through and you add clips throughout your scene and you can really kind of build things out, and Fairlight makes it easy to do that. I'll just switch back to our finished page here, and we have a lot of sounds plugged in here. Just close our media pool so we can see everything. We have our dialogue here. We have some VO from a mom character, which is her kind of yelling at the kids from the other room.
Hello? You guys left your bikes on the steps again.
We have some of the falling down sounds. Right? And just a lot more things layered in here. As well as this toilet flushing, which was a big part of the story because they accidentally flushed their little alien friend down the toilet when she fell down. And we're mixing a couple of different toilet flushing sounds here to kind of make that work. And then we have some music, which I'll just solo here. And we have some ambient sounds after the toilet's flushing. We have some kind of natural sounds of grabbing the book, paper rustling, the lid opening. And all of that is put in afterwards. And so it's really nice. This is just such a good environment to be able to put in all of the clips and everything that you need. But you could do most of this in the edit page. And where the Fairlight page gets really good is making the little minute tweaks to things. So this third track, this is the mom voiceover. And I'm just going to add a new track here and just put this down a track by holding Alt and hitting down. And let's solo this and listen to what it sounds like.
Hello? You guys left your bikes on the steps again.
So this is mom yelling.
Hello? You guys left your bikes on the steps again.
But she's supposed to be in the other room, right? She's supposed to be like somewhere else in the house.
Hello? You guys left your bikes on the steps again.
And it sounds like she's right there. And so there's a couple things that we can do here. One is we can add an effect for reverb. So if we hit this plus button, we can look at all kinds of different effects. Go down to reverb and click reverb. And there are all kinds of little controls. And if you don't know lots about reverb, that's okay. Go up here to default, and we'll just say maybe Studio 2 and see how this sounds.
Hello? You guys left your bikes on the steps again.
Okay, so that's great because that sounds like it's kind of farther away, down in the other room.
Hello? You guys left your bikes on the steps again.
And so we're part of the way there. The other thing that happens when your voice is kind of in another room is you don't hear the high parts of the voice. You mostly hear the low parts, the kind of booming parts. So we can fix that with an EQ. I can double click on this EQ here. And if you're unfamiliar with an EQ, that's basically just turning up the volume of different frequencies in a sound. And so the higher frequencies are on the right, the lower frequencies are on the left. And this is like a graph, kind of like the curves graphs we talked about in the color page. But I can take this number 5 and just kind of push this to the left. And we're just going to turn down the volumes of the higher pitches in mom's voice.
Hello? You guys left your bikes on the steps again.
See, now that sounds like she's farther away in the house. Check this out. So this is without the equalizer.
Hello? You guys left your bikes on the steps again.
And this is with it.
Hello? You guys left your bikes on the steps again.
Yeah, so it sounds like she's in the other room. And you can easily add this kind of stuff with the mixer here in Fairlight. The other thing you can do is add some dynamics. Now, the dynamics, if you double click on this, this is just a collection of different filters that you can put on your audio to help the quieter things get louder and the louder things get quieter and things kind of like that. And so if somebody's talking and some things they say are loud and some things they say are quiet, you can kind of fix that here with just one filter without having to go in and draw little keyframes. One thing you can do is just, again, go here to the preset, and we'll just go to dialogue compression. And that's just going to make sure that the really loud parts don't get too loud, and it kind of just smooths out the volume a little bit.
Hello? You guys left your bikes on the steps again.
And so that can help with dialogue to make it kind of sit in the space. The dynamics, the EQ, as well as adding effects like reverb. And now we have this.
Hello? You guys left your bikes on the steps again.
And it works really, really well. And all of these tracks work pretty much the same. And you can add effects or change dynamics or EQ on all of these tracks to make everything fit exactly how it's supposed to. And yeah, great thing to do in Fairlight. Other thing that's really nice is you can use buses. Now, a bus is a way to take multiple tracks and kind of route them through one track. So let's see, I'll just go to my Fairlight page start just to show you this a little better. So we have these two dialogue tracks here, Isaac home and Gwen home.
Where is he?
I had him and then you pushed me.
And if we wanted to add an effect to these, we could only add an effect to one track at a time, and we would have to copy and paste them back and forth, and it would just be miserable. And so one thing we can do is route these both through a bus. So if we go up to Fairlight and go to bus format, we can add a bus. Let's just say add bus, and we're going to make a stereo bus, and we're going to call this DIA for dialogue. Okay, and we'll hit OK. Now in our mixer, if we take this little edge and we pull this to the left, we have our bus 2, which is our dialogue bus. We also have our track 1 and track 2, which are our dialogue tracks. And right now, those are both routed to bus 1 here on bus outputs. And so we can see, if we play this back, that we have audio coming in on bus 1. But we could switch this to bus 2, dialogue like this. And now as we play this back, we have our dialogue coming in here on the right and all of our other sound effects we've added in bus 1. But we don't hear our dialogue. What's the deal with that? We don't hear them talking or anything like that. That's because bus 1 is like our master mix. That's what we're going to hear. Bus 2, we haven't really told to do anything. They're kind of just playing into bus 2, and bus 2 is almost like a hidden mix right now. If we hit this plus for our dialogue bus, we can route that to bus 1. And so what we're doing is we're routing both of these tracks where we can adjust a bunch of stuff. And then we're taking this one track and putting it into bus 1. So now, and now we hear them talking.
Where is he?
I had him and then you pushed.
But that dialogue is going through this bus first. So that means that we could do something like EQ both of these at the same time with the same EQ. And I'll just put that mom EQ on it. The mom EQ.
Where is he?
I had him and then you pushed me.
Right? And so we can
Where is he?
I had him and then you.
adjust those both together. Or what's more common is just double clicking on this dynamics and adding some dialogue compression there.
You pushed me.
Where is he?
I had him and then you pushed me.
And we're treating some of our dialogue that way. So now we kind of have a master track for our dialogue. That's bus 2. And you can do this for a bunch of different buses. You could have a bus for all of your door sounds, a bus for all of your sound effects, a bus for your music and all that stuff. And you can make as many tracks as you want. I could have 30 tracks here, and I could route them to certain buses to kind of control them in groups. This is also great if you want to export, everything except for the dialogue. If you're doing like a multi-language thing, or everything except for the music, if you want to be able to edit this better later. It kind of depends on what you're doing. One other thing I want to show you that we can do in Fairlight that's just a really nice advantage is it's really easy to come in and adjust your track. All you do is hold Alt and you can add little keyframes here to the volume. And you can really get detailed with how loud this stuff is. And so if you do have a part that's really loud or really quiet, you can kind of go in here and boost it yourself, which always makes things a little bit better and come through a little bit nicer, even if you're using a compressor or using the dynamics here. So again, if we wanted to get really crazy with this, just zoom in. Here's the volume line. We can push this up or down to make this louder or quieter. And you can hold Alt or Option on a Mac and adjust this line to adjust the volume over time. Now, notice that we don't have to do this to fade things out. We can just use the fade transitions here on the edges of our clips. That's a much quicker, easier way to do that. Same thing here. These are crossfaded just from the edit page. And everything that we do here, if I were to fade this out over like a big fade, if I were to switch over to the edit page, look at this. We still have that big fade here. We still have some of the automation, although that's a little bit more annoying to play with in the edit page. We still have all the track colors and all of the clips and everything. And again, just like the other pages, we don't have to render things out or anything like that. We can just play this back and it will play back exactly like we have in Fairlight. It's just easier to get to all of the tools to adjust this in Fairlight, but it's going to sound the same in Fairlight and the edit page because it's all happening at the same time on the same timeline. Now, there is a lot more to get into with Fairlight, way more than I have time to get into right now, and this video is already super long. I'm also not the world's biggest audio guy as well. I like it, I appreciate it, but I'm really more about color and fusion and doing edits and that kind of thing. We do, however, have some really great audio resources in our DaVinci Resolve Resources PDF, including a top-notch course from our friend Jason Yadlovsky. Click here to get that PDF for free if you get it right now. There's also a link in the description. But definitely download this project file, open up the Fairlight page, start with the Fairlight page start, and use these sound effects and any sound effects that you might have to make this scene a little better. You're free to use this to practice. So helpful when you're learning to do sound design to have some nice stuff like this. That's our gift to you. All right, let's finish up this course and head over to the Deliver page. All right, the last page of Resolve is the Deliver page. This is where you're going to actually set your settings and your outputs and everything to render your movie. Something to mention is in the Edit page, if you go up to File and go to Quick Export, you can actually render quite a few different formats that you might want to render for your movie, including presets for YouTube, Vimeo, TikTok, that kind of thing. But they don't really give you control over the settings. These are just kind of a quick way to export something with a preset. Over here in the Deliver page, this is where you can get super detailed with every single little thing about the video format you're creating. And it's a pretty simple layout. Here in the left-hand side, this is where most of the action is going to happen. These are the render settings. So these are all the little detailed properties and everything for the files you'll be making. Up here is the viewer. We also have clips here, kind of like in the color page, and then we have our timeline. Now, the only difference with this timeline is you can't do anything. You can't edit things or trim things or anything like that. The only thing you can do is set an in and an out. And so you can decide to render just part of your video or the whole thing by clicking this render in, out, or entire timeline like that. And there's not a whole lot else that you need to pay attention to here as far as the timelines go. On the right, we have our render queue, and this is just going to be a list of jobs that you make. And you can put multiple different timelines or even different projects and everything in this render queue, and you can have these all render at the same time while you go to lunch or whatever. But really, I mean, the majority of the action in this page is going to happen here in the render settings. So let's take a look at that. Across the top here, we have a bunch of different presets. And so these are great starting points if you're not really sure exactly how to set your settings. Let's just start with a YouTube preset. Just click on YouTube. And what that will do is change all of my settings down here, and it will give me some limited options to be able to change things. So some of the options, of course, it's going to ask for a file name. It's going to ask where to render it. You can hit browse and pick a folder on your computer. You can pick your resolution, your frame rate, your video format, your codec, and some other advanced settings here. But anytime that you click one of these presets, it really just sets your settings. And what I like to do is just click a preset and then go back over here to custom export. That's going to keep all of the settings that it had, but it's going to open up a bunch more options for me. And so I can go through and really tweak things and get just totally crazy with all of these settings. Again, if you don't know all of these settings, it's not that big a deal. You can probably just click the YouTube preset or even the H.264 or H.265 master presets, and those would be great for YouTube. If you have the paid version of Resolve, you can render H.265 QuickTime, and oh baby, that looks a lot better than H.264. I believe this also works on Mac with the free version, but the PC free version doesn't have H.265 rendering, which is too bad. But that's essentially what I would do for YouTube. And if you want to get a really good export, what I would do is just click on YouTube 1080 and then click back to custom export. And I would change just a couple things here. Again, if you're on the paid version of Resolve, I would click H.265 here. Encoder, I would pick NVIDIA if you have an NVIDIA card because it'll just go faster. Resolution, I'd like to upres this actually to Ultra HD, even if it's a 1080p timeline, because that's going to make YouTube actually use a better compression on this just because it's higher resolution. And it's going to end up looking better, even though upresing this to Ultra HD won't make it look better just by doing that. It's just going to kind of trick YouTube into compressing this better. The only other thing I'd really change is this quality. I would restrict this to 2000 times your frame rate. So this is about 24 frames. So we could do 48,000 kilobits per second. And I found that this is the best kind of bang for your buck as far as how big the file should be and how good it looks. If you do more than this, you won't really notice a difference, but you'll make the file size a lot bigger. And if you do less than this, you might start to notice a little bit of a difference in the quality that this is actually rendering. Everything else, you could probably leave just about as is. You can go over to audio. I would make sure that the data rate is 320 kilobits per second here. And then if you switch over to file, you can change the naming conventions and stuff. If you're rendering a bunch of things, you can have these use the timeline name, which can sometimes be really helpful. If you have multiple different timelines and you have the timelines named like you want your videos to be named, you can just switch that to timeline. And then you can just add a bunch of these to the render queue without having to type the name each time. But once you're ready to add it, you can go down to add to render queue like this and just click on that. And it's going to ask me if I want to add higher resolution renders. It's basically saying, hey, you're upresing this and that's not really going to help a whole lot. Are you sure you want to do that? And I said, yes, add. And now it's added a job here in the render queue. This isn't rendering yet. It isn't exporting or doing anything yet. It's just waiting. And once it's time for me to render, when I'm ready to go to lunch or stop using Resolve for a few minutes, I can click render all and that will start rendering. The cool thing about this is I can queue multiple different versions of this same timeline or even multiple timelines. And so let's say I want a H.265 master. I can just click on that. And that's just going to be a little bit bigger file, a little bit higher quality. Add that to render queue. And I'll go over to file and here, maybe I'll make it a custom name. We'll call this HQ H.265. Add that. Maybe we want a really high quality render of this that we could use for years to come and re-edit and do all kinds of stuff. You can just switch to custom export, go to format, QuickTime, codec. Let's just do DNxHR. This is a really high quality format. And then you can pick your quality from this list. Basically, the further you go up this list, the bigger the file, but the better quality render it makes. You could probably do like HQX 10-bit if you wanted to, or 12-bit. And then they just get totally crazy after that. But if you want the ultimate archive and you don't worry about taking up a bunch of space on your computer, you could do DNxHR 444 12-bit. In this, we don't need to upres because we're not putting it on YouTube. For audio, instead of AAC, I'll do linear PCM, bit depth 32. And that's going to give us the highest quality video and audio that we could render out of Resolve, basically. And so we'll call this archive and hit add to render queue. And so now we have 3 different kinds of files that we're putting out this. Let's say maybe we're doing an interview or something and we want to export this as a podcast. We could also go over to our presets and click audio only. And so it's automatically just set these settings. It's unticked export video. And for audio, we're going to pick format WAV, linear PCM, bit depth 24. You could also just directly make this a MP3. That looks good. And I'll hit add to render queue. So now we have all these different kinds of versions that we could render out. Let me show you one other cool thing too. let's say we want to export the audio in separate tracks. Like if we open up our Fairlight Page Finished timeline, we have all these different tracks here. Let's say we want to export these all synced, but as different tracks so that we could go and remix this later if we want to. Here in our audio options, we could say wave linear PCM, but output track 1, we could change this to all timeline tracks. And what that's going to do is make a separate file for each track in our timeline. So we can add that to render queue. And that's going to be all of our audio in separate tracks. And so we can really save this out in so many different formats and really keep this kind of future-proof. When we're ready to render all this, I can select all of this stuff, just shift select it. When these are all selected or when none of them are selected, you can hit render all. And what that will do is render all of your footage. Now, I made a mistake. The output of these shouldn't be 1920 by 1080. It should be 1920 by 800 because we have this widescreen format. So if I add a job to this and I want to adjust it, I can click this pencil and it'll ask me if I want to save the render job. I'll say don't save. That'll get rid of that. And it will load my settings here in the render settings again. And so I think instead of 3840 by 2160, let's still up-res it, but we're going to do 3840 by 1600. Great. Add to render queue, add, and we'll replace. And we can go through and adjust our jobs and everything. I'm just going to get rid of a couple of these. In fact, I'll even make a archive file. Let's just do QuickTime DNxHR 12-bit, 1920 by 800, looks good. And for the audio, let's do linear PCM and output track. Let's do all timeline tracks. You can also click on timeline track and pick a specific track and then hit this button and do like multiple different tracks like that. So I could do, track 1, track 2, that kind of thing. You can also pick different buses if you have several different buses for your tracks. So for instance, if we go to Fusion Page Start, where we had a couple of buses set up, this will show me my bus 1 stereo as well as my dialogue bus. And so I could do bus 1 and then dialogue separate. And then we can add to render queue like this. And we could render these out and it'll create the files that we asked it to. I can right click on any of these and say open file location. That'll bring that up in my system and I can double click on this and actually look at my finished product. Isn't that awesome?
Whoa.
So great. So hopefully you've learned a ton in this course about making your own videos in Resolve. I hope this has been really helpful for you. So I know we went over a lot in this course. And if you want a really nice little index, a nice roundup of all the best places to learn all of these things and dive deeper, make sure to check out our DaVinci Resolve resources PDF. It's available right there. You can get it for free as an instant download. You'll also be signed up for our newsletter to hear from yours truly if you're interested in Fusion. If you don't know me, my name's Casey and I teach Fusion. And I'm so glad that I can't believe you sat through this entire video. That's amazing. If you made it all the way to here, would you leave a comment below and let me know? Because you get a medal of some kind of honorable mention, a medal of honorable mention for being so awesome. And hey, like I said at the beginning of the video, once you're ready to learn Fusion, I want to help you with that. So make sure to keep me in mind when you're ready to dive into that. But until then, please use everything that you've learned to make awesome videos, express yourself, get out of your comfort zone, and create things that didn't exist before, because that's what's magical. So I'm going to put the link to our resources PDF right here, and you can download that totally for free. And again, yeah, if you want to get into Fusion, well, here's a great video for that. All right. Hey, thanks for stopping by, San Diego.